Hi, I'm Aidan from Mysteries Ahoy, a blog where I write about mysteries old and new, but mostly old. As the most iconic character in detective fiction, Sherlock Holmes has a pretty healthy legacy in video games. One of my favourite games growing up was Sherlock Holmes, The Case of the Serrated Scalpel, a game which only took me about a decade to finally complete. But in my defence, I was playing in a pre-internet age, and so when I got stuck, I just had to wait until either inspiration or random luck struck. Frogwares Games began developing its Sherlock Holmes series in 2002 with the publication of The Mystery of the Mummy. But I jumped on board 2 years later when The Case of the Silver Earring, the second in the range, was released. That one, I'm pleased to say, took me rather less time. Those games were both essentially point-and-click adventures. Holmes would move to the area you pointed at, pick up items, and then you would combine them until you finally worked out what the game wanted you to do next. The series took a huge step forward in 2006 with The Awakened, a game with horror elements that you now played from a real-time first-person perspective. It was a bold, often rather frustrating experience as you tried to spot clues against the dark, murky backgrounds, but getting to see through Holmes's eyes was really immersive and helped the player begin to feel like the great detective. Incidentally, that game was recently remade as a sequel to the one we'll be talking about today. 3 further installments followed The Awakened, each putting Holmes up against an iconic character: Arsène Lupin, Jack the Ripper, and then, well, that would be spoiling it. Crimes and Punishments offered the next huge step forward, implementing a new deductive system that enabled the player to make connections between bits of evidence. You would still have to spot clues, but then you would begin to interpret them. More exciting still, a new morality system meant that you could decide whether you would punish the character you accuse or let them go free. The process of immersion was essentially complete. From this point onwards, it no longer felt like you were following a set narrative. Now the player began to dictate their own experience. The following game, The Devil's Daughter, picked up where its predecessor left off, and basically gave us more of the same. Which brings us to the game I'm talking about today, Sherlock Holmes Chapter 1. This game came out on November 16th, 2021. I started playing it the day it came out, with the full intention I'd be blogging about it soon afterwards. Given that this video is going out in May 2023 though, clearly I missed my own deadline. Now, as the name implies, Chapter 1 is a prequel to all of the other Sherlock Holmes games. It's set before Holmes is even a consulting detective. The character is quite different to how we'll see him later on. He's brooding, emotional, and struggling to resolve some issues from his childhood. He has a friend called John, but it quickly becomes clear that this is not Dr. Watson, and that there is more to this character than meets the eye. In other ways though, this Sherlock, or Sherry as he is known here, is pretty similar. He's still enormously perceptive, able to pick up on tiny details of a person's dress or appearance to build a portrait of their character. He can be abrasive in his dealings with those with authority or power, and his relationship with Mycroft is challenging. In one of the more interesting aspects of the story, it is clear that Sherry, already has the makings of a great detective. Here he's not developing new skills, but rather rediscovering ones he had in his youth, when he ran all over the island of Cordona with John, getting himself into all manner of trouble. The plot of this game, then, is that Sherry has returned to Cordona 10 years after his mother's death to visit her grave. While there, he meets an enigmatic art dealer who tells him that his mother didn't die in the way he believed, causing him to begin to search in his own past for the truth. While Holmes investigates his past, he roams around the fictional island of Cordona, happening upon a number of other cases. This brings me to the biggest difference between this game and those which came before. Chapter 1 is basically an open-world adventure. Once you complete the tutorial, you get to pick the order in which you tackle events, allowing you to explore and focus on the story threads that interested you most. There are a number of secrets and side quests to find and explore, some more thrilling than others. Of these, my favourite was the treasure hunt that you get to take part in, where you have to find landmarks based on photographs. While the quality or the depth of those quests is inconsistent, it is a huge step forward from the small sections of London that we were able to explore in the previous 2 games. Cordona itself is a really cool creation, an island divided into several distinct areas, each with its own sense of style and culture. There is a real sense that this island is a meeting place of different cultures, and the developers do a really fine job of creating beautiful and distinctive architecture, as well as giving a sense of tensions between each of those groups. Indeed, some of my favourite missions in the game are the ones that directly explore that. Towards the end of the game, once you've solved most of the side quests, the world can begin to feel a little empty. But at that point, you should be able to utilise the fast travel system, helping to cut down on the frustration of travel across this largely empty island. My only other issue with the setting lies with its integration with the game's disguise mechanic, a leftover from some of the previous games, which basically means that to get information, you have to dress in a way that doesn't intimidate or upset the person you're trying to get information from. Now, that sometimes works really well, particularly when it involves mimicking a uniform or a person from a photograph, but there are times when it's not exactly clear what a particular person is looking for, especially when you need to speak to random bystanders in Old Cordona. Just be prepared for a little frustration. On the other hand, this mechanic does allow you to run around Cordona dressed up in some pretty distinctive outfits, which can sometimes be quite fun. Many of the missions are really well designed, and to my delight, can be played using real deductive skill if you want. While the game basically allows you to be wrong without being penalised, it is really satisfying when you realise that you've worked out what was meant to be the right solution all by yourself. The other major innovation that this title brings is a combat system that lets you fight as Holmes. Now, this is less successful than the open world, particularly if you're not very good at it, but it can be skipped if you want. Those who play it will be rewarded with in-game currency for arresting criminals without killing them, encouraging players to behave in a non-lethal way. The main game storyline, titled A Mother's Love, is there sitting in the background, waiting for the player whenever they're ready. Completing it does end the game, but John will warn you pretty strongly if you're at risk of doing that, giving you a chance to go finish everything else up if you wish. The solution to that plotline is not likely to surprise you by the time you get to the end, but I think it's really quite emotionally satisfying and fits the themes of the story pretty well. What's more, an ending cutscene does a wonderful job of tying up Sherry's journey, transforming him into the character we know and love, while visualising a key moment from the Holmes canon.
I have my eye on a suite in Baker Street, which would suit us down to the ground. You don't mind the smell of strong tobacco, I hope?
While Chapter 1 is not a perfect game, it did a lot right, introducing some neat gameplay elements and a great island setting. I will admit to struggling a little with the Ed Tudor Pole style visual that the game sets as Sherry's default, but the good news is that if you don't like it, you can change it, whether you like trad Holmes or perhaps something a little more distinctive. Next stop for me is probably the sequel, the reimagined The Awakened, though I am reminded that I also wanted to do one of these videos about Poirot the Early Cases. Stay tuned here or on my blog to see which I get to next.